We begin today the Gemara on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, 13 lines down from the top of the Yamud. The Gemara goes back to what it says in the Mishnah, Dine Momenes, Hatmeis, Va'ataras Chulu. Anytime there's a Bezdin and they're discussing matters of money or Tomei, Tara, and so on. In this case, when you are taking the opinions of the judges, whose opinion do you listen to first? So you have to give the honor to the greatest of the Bezdin. He says his opinion first. And then afterwards, everyone else says their opinion. The Mishnah went on to say, as we'll see soon, the Gemara is going to bring the source, that when it comes to din and nefashis, there it's the opposite. By capital punishment, the one that's the smallest of the Bezdin, he says his opinion first, and then the greatest speaks up later. Okay, so now the Gemara here says, Omar Rav. Rav said about this, Ano havoi biminyona debei Rebbe. I was part of the count of the Bezdin by Rebbe. He was a student actually of Rebbe, and he was part of the count in his Bezdin. And when they discussed the money matter, they started with me to hear my opinion about this. Now Rashi here brings the exact case. It was a money matter, benegeh to a sekrikin. There's a halacha regarding a sekrikin, which the Gemara brings in Gittin. I'm not going to get into the details of this now, but the point is it was a situation where they were discussing a money matter, and Rav was the one that was asked to say his opinion first. So the question is, but in our Mishnah it says that in the case of a money matter, the one that's the greatest says his opinion first. So over here, Rebbe was the greatest, not Rav. So why did he say his opinion first? The count by the Bezdin of Rebbe is different. They always began from someone from the side. The side was someone that was smaller in the Bezdin. The way they would sit in the Bezdin was that the greatest was in the center, and the other ones were on the side. And it was by the level of greatness. By Rebbe's Bezdin, they always took the opinion of the one that was on the side, the one that was smaller first. Rebbe did not say his opinion first. And what's the reason for this? Because sorry, what am I over here? Yeah, okay, so the Gemara itself doesn't spell it out, but Rashi says the reason is this is Rebbe's humility. Rebbe was such an onav that he didn't say his opinion first. So that was an exception. The idea that the one that's the greatest has to say his opinion first, it's not a must, it's not a chiyuv. You're supposed to give him the honor, take, but you don't have to. You can have someone else from the side also start. So therefore, by Rebbe, because of his humility, he always had someone else, in this case Rav, said his opinion first. Now, from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, v'ad Rebbe, until Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, lo matzinu Torah ugdula b'makom echad. We don't find anyone else that was the greatest in Torah, and he was also Gedula. He was the leader of Klal Yisrael. He had influence, he had money. We don't find, like it was by Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was the leader of the Yidden, and he also was the greatest in Torah. All generations in between, you don't find anybody that was the same until Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He was the leader of Klal Yisrael, and he was also rich, and he was very influential, and he was the greatest in Torah. Now, the Gemara simply is bringing this here because we just spoke about Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and also it's bringing a statement that Rabbe Berei de Rabbe said, or Rab Hillel Berei de Rab Valis. This is an unusual name, an unusual Ameda, so it's bringing another thing that he said about Rebbe. But other Mefarshim actually say that this also explains why Rebbe was able to allow any judgment that someone min atzad should say his opinion. Because why usually do you say that someone min atzad should not say his opinion? Why does Rebbe have to say his opinion first? Because if you can allow someone min atzad to say his opinion first always, so then that might become a competition to, or he may come and think that he's as great as the Nasi, that's really the greatest. It may become sort of a competition to him. So you have to leave the honor of the Nasi, that he should be the one that should say it first, and you can't allow by Dinin Mominus someone Menatzat to say. By Dinin Nefashis, you have no choice. Over there, we'll see the Gemara brings a pasuk, you have to start Menatzat, but usually by Dinin Mominus, the one that's the greatest, the Nasi, he has to speak up first. But by Rebbe, his humility, he didn't do that. Why was Rebbe not, there was no concern about giving up on his kavod, of his nesius of who he is, because by Rebbe, there was no one that could challenge his greatness. Rebbe was so great, that it was clear that nobody is similar to him, so there was no threat by allowing someone that's smaller than him to speak up first in all cases by all dinei Torah. That's how it's explained over here in the Namukei Yosef, other Mefarshim, and the Rishonim. Okay, so now here the Gemara goes through different people in the generations between Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbeinu HaKadosh, where seemingly they also were the greatest in Torah, and they were the leaders in Klal Yisrael. They also had Torah v'Gedulah b'Makom Echad. So the Gemara asks, "V'loi, do we not find anyone else in other generations? V'havi Yeshua, in the generation of Yeshua, he was the greatest leader, and he was the greatest in Torah as well." Answers the Gemara, "Have Elazar." No, Elazar, that was in his times as well. He was his colleague in Torah, and he was on the same level of him as in Torah. So you can't say that it's Torah Gedulah b'Makom Echad, that Torah is in one place, that the Torah is only by Yeshua, that he's the leader and he has Torah. Because the Torah is not just b'Makom Echad, it's by Yeshua and by someone else, by Elazar as well. Fragt the Gemara, but v'have Pinchas. After Yeshua and Elazar Kohen pass away, Pinchas, which was a Kohen Gadol, he took over also the leadership of Klal Yisrael, and he was the greatest in Torah as well. So he had Torah Gedulah b'Makom Echad alone, only him in his times. Says the Gemara, actually it wasn't only him. How was Zekanim? In his time, there was also Zekanim that were also on the same level as Torah as him. And Rashi brings examples of Asniel, Avtson, which is and Boyaz. They were, it says there in the Psukim and Shoftim, they were from those Shoftim, those judges that were very great in Torah, and they were on the same level as Pinchas. So it wasn't only him that had Torah Gedulah b'Makom Echad. Or actually, he had Gedulah, he was the leader, but it wasn't only him that had the Torah. Others were the same level as him as Torah. In fact, the Gemara v'have Shaul. Shaul HaMelech was the king, and he was also the greatest in Torah in his times. Says the Gemara, but have Shmuel. There was also Shmuel that was alive in his times, and actually Shmuel was not only as great as Shaul HaMelech, he was even greater in Torah than Shaul HaMelech. So even though he wasn't the leader like Shaul, he wasn't the king, but he was greater than him in Torah. In fact, the Gemara, but v'hanoch nafshe. But then Shmuel passed away, and Shaul then was actually alone in Torah and Gedulah. And it says the Gemara, Kule Shane Kamrinan. We mean to say here that by Moshe Rabbeinu and by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, their entire lifetime, they were the only one that were great in Torah Gedulah. Meaning from when they became a leader, from when Moshe Rabbeinu, from when Rabbeinu HaKadosh became a leader, they were the greatest in Torah Gedulah for their entire lifetime, which is not the case by Shaul. There was a while when Shmuel was still alive. David HaMelech was the greatest, he was the king, and he was also the greatest in Torah in his times. So how can we say that there's no one else? And says the Gemara, Have Ira Haya'iri. In Shmuel, it tells us about an individual by the name of Ira Haya'iri, and it says that he was a Kohen LeDavid, which means he was greater than David HaMelech, even in teaching Torah. He wasn't a king, but he was very great in teaching Torah. Rashi brings from the Gemara Moed Katan that describes that he would sit on a chair or on some kind of elevated place, and David HaMelech would sit on the floor in front of him and listen to him teaching Torah. So he was greater than him in Torah. But he passed away, and then David HaMelech alone was the greatest in Torah and Gedulah. Says the Gemara, but as we said, it only refers to someone that his entire lifetime, from when he assumed his leadership, was the greatest in Torah. In fact, the Gemara when Shlomo HaMelech, we see that he was the greatest in his leadership and also in his Torah. The Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech was the greatest. So how could you say that there was no one else between Moshe and Rabbeinu HaKadosh? And says the Gemara, have a Shimi ben Geda. There was an individual by the name of Shimi ben Geda that had many, many students, and he was just as great as Shlomo HaMelech in Torah as well. Rashi brings that when Shimi would go around, and when he came to Shlomo HaMelech, he would have 1,000 students that would follow him where he was going, because he was very great in teaching Torah. In fact, the Gemara, but Shimi ben Geda was not alive all the time Shlomo HaMelech was alive, because of Kotle. And eventually this Shimi ben Geda, he was killed by Shlomo HaMelech. And the reason is because he rebelled, or he left Yerushalayim and he wasn't supposed to, he swore he wasn't going to leave. He was Chayiv Misa, and in the end he was killed. So he wasn't, so Shlomo HaMelech then was the only one. Says the Gemara, as we said before, Kul Shani Kamrina. We're speaking about someone that his entire lifetime was great in Torah and Gedulah. Like the Gemara, have a Chizkiah was a king, and he was the greatest in Torah in his times as well. And says the Gemara, have a Shevna. There was another individual in his time by the name of Shevna. We learned about him before in the Gemara here in Sanhedrin. This Shevna was if I remember correctly, a general in Shaul HaMelech's army. And Shevna was also a huge Talmud Chacham, and he taught Torah. And the Gemara there describes that he had more students that he taught Torah than Chizkiah HaMelech. And this Shevna later he was killed by Sanchedrin's army. The Gemara actually says that he learned Torah Shalei Lishma. Because of what the Gemara says there about Shevna, Taisus over here says, someone not good is this part of the Gemara. That the Gemara is asking a question from Shevna. The reason is because Shevna was not a tzaddik in the end. He learned Torah Shalei Lishma. So you can't ask a question that there was Shevna as well. So someone not good is this. Okay, so now the Gemara asks for Ha'iktil. Shevna was killed, as I mentioned, the story that he eventually got killed by Sancheriv because he wanted to give in to Sancheriv, and he went out and he got killed. So the Gemara again says, Kuli Shani Kamrinan. We're referring only to Moshe and Rebbe, that their entire lifetime they were the greatest in Torah Gedula b'Makom Echad. Okay, the Gemara asks all these questions of these different individuals, and it keeps on giving the same answer again and again. It's not mamish the same. In the Ben Yehoyada, he has a pshat to explain why the Gemara keeps on asking the question again and again. Okay, let's go weiter. Fragt the Gemara, v'hohava Ezra. There was in the time of Ezra. Ezra was the leader of Yidden, and he was the greatest in Torah as well. Answers the Gemara, Hava Nehemiah ben Chachalya. There was Nehemiah ben Chachalya, and here the point of the Gemara's answer is, even if Ezra was greater than him in Torah, but Nehemiah ben Chachalya was appointed by the government to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, and he, in his leadership, in his Gedula, he was a greater leader than Ezra himself, and therefore Ezra did not have the Gedula like Nehemiah had. Now, like Ezra had, so therefore it comes out that Ezra did not have Torah Gedula b'Makom Echad like Moshe and Rebbe. And the Gemara goes on, says, Omer Rav Ada bar Ava said, Afani Omer, I can also tell you that there's a third individual that was zeicha to the same thing. Mimais Rebbe, Ad Rav Ashi, from the time of Rebbe until Rav Ashi, which was the latest of Damiroim, and he's the one that was Masada the Gemara. We don't find anyone that had the same, like Rebbe and Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rav Ashi had Torah and Gedula. He was the greatest leader and the greatest in Torah. In fact, the Gemara, Valoi, is there no one else in the time of Rav Ashi himself that was not as great as him? So here the Gemara is not asking about the generations in between. Here the Gemara is asking about the generation of Rav Ashi himself. V'hava Huna bar Nosson. There was an individual, one of the Amiraim, in the name of Huna bar Nosson, that was very great in Torah, like Rav Ashi, and he was also very connected to the government and very influential, and he was a leader. He was a Reish Galusa. After Rav Ashi passed away, he actually took over Rav Ashi in Torah. He became the Rosh Hashiva. So Huna bar Nosson was also on the same level as Rav Ashi. But the Gemara says, no, he wasn't. Huna bar Nosson, Meichef Avachayev Leila Rav Ashi. Huna bar Nosson was subjugated. He was under the rulership of Rav Ashi. He was not as great as Rav Ashi. Therefore, Rav Ashi in his generation was alone. Torah Gedula b'Makom Echad. So the Mefarshim say that Moshe Rabbeinu, Rebbe, and Rav Ashi, they are the three great individuals that gave us the three main components of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Tzivalonu Moshe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh that was Masada the Mishnayos, and then Rav Ashi that was Masada the Gemara, which is the foundation of Torah for the entire Klal Yisrael. So they had a tremendous kayach of Torah Gedula b'Makom Echad, and therefore they were able to give over Torah, and no one was able to challenge them. So Abish gave them this kayach in order to be able to give over Torah to Klal Yisrael. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, Dina nefashis maschilin minatzat. When it comes to Dina nefashis, here you don't allow the greatest to speak up first, but someone minatzat from the smaller ones of the Sanhedrin, he speaks up first. What's the source for this? Rav bar Papa makra. So Rav bar Papa says, the pasuk says, Leisana al Riv. So how do we teach this pasuk? That Leisana al Rav. If you take out the Yud, it's written without a Yud, so therefore you read it Leisana al Rav. You can't argue with someone that's great. Meaning, if the one that's greatest in the Bezdin speaks up first, so now no one's going to argue with him. Now, when it comes to Din and Nefashis, the Torah says, B'shaftu Eida v'tzilu Eida. We have to try to be Melamed Chusanim. So what's if the one that's greatest speaks up and says he's guilty? No one else is going to want to speak up and say that he's innocent. So therefore, you can't allow the greatest to speak up first. Now, the way that Rishonim explain this, Taisus touches upon this also, but other Rishonim explain this over here. It doesn't mean like it sounds literally. I spoke about this already when we learned the Mishnah. It doesn't mean that when the greatest speaks up and says that he's guilty, that no one else is allowed to speak up. You're allowed to speak up. If you have a svara al pi Torah that you see that the one that's greatest made a mistake, you're always allowed to speak up. So what does it mean, like sana al riv, that you can't speak up against the one that's greatest? What it means is that you may not want to speak up. You may be intimidated. Because he's such a great one, the greatest of the Bezdin says his opinion, no one else is going to want to speak up. That's what it's saying here. And this goof is what the pasuk is telling me, Leisana al Rav, that because people are intimidated to speak up in front of someone that's the greatest in the Bezdin, so therefore, by Dina Nefashis, in order to allow for V'shaftu Eida v'tzilu Eida, the other people should not be intimidated to speak up, you start from the one that's the smallest. But by Dina Mominis, even though over there something similar could happen, by Din and Mamanis, if you allow the one that's greatest to speak up, then others may be intimidated to say their opinion. But since by Din and Mamanis you don't have this special mitzvah to try to be malamet zchus on the person, that to try to find them innocent, so over there the Chachamim, over there the pasuk was not so makbid. Over there the pasuk says you could allow the greatest to speak up, and others will say their opinion as well. We're not so concerned about the fact that they may be intimidated about this. That's the source there. So this pasuk lesan alif. Now Rabbi Babachana Rabbi Yechani says there's another source mehacha. What we find by David the Melech when he went to give when he had to give a punishment of miseh. So it says Vayem David la noshav. So David says to his men, Chigru ishus charbay, that you should girdle yourself with your sword. And vayachru ishus charbay, they girdle themselves with the sword. Vayachke gam David is charbay. After them, David the Melech put on his sword. So what this pasuk is speaking about, according to the drush of the Gemara here, is there was a person by the name of Novel that was a moired b'malchus. He rebelled against David HaMelech, and therefore he was chayiv miseh. So when it says it's referring to the judgment. When they came to judge him, so what does it say? The other men around David HaMelech, they first said their opinion about the judgment, and then afterwards David HaMelech comes and judges him. That's the vayachkru that it refers over here is the judgment. So we see that David HaMelech said his opinion last about this. Amar Rav said, Shaina Adam l'talmidai, a teacher can teach his student the halacha regarding a certain subject, and then v'dan inmai b'din nefashis, and then after this he could be together with his student in din nefashis, and the opinion of the teacher and the opinion of the student will be considered to be two different opinions. The student now can be included as one of the judges, and the teacher says his opinion, the student says his opinion, and they're counted as two opinions, even though seemingly everything that the student is saying is only what his teacher taught him. So they're not really two different opinions, but they're counted as two different opinions. So the Gemara asks on this, it says in a Braisa, Meisvei, Hatares Vatmeis, when there's a halacha b'negei to Tumah and Tara, Ha'avu b'noy Rav Talmidoi, a father and a son, or a teacher and a student, Mainim Lem Shnayim, they're considered to be two different people, their opinions is counted as two. Right? When it comes to these kinds of halachas, you don't really need a bezdin, the paskin, b'negei to Tumah and Tara. So over here, since you don't need a bezdin, so you don't have to take account of each one separately. So over here, they could be counted as two separate opinions. However, when it comes to other matters, dine mominus, when it comes to a subject of money, dine nefashis, when it comes to a subject of capital punishment, dine makis, if you have to give lashes to someone, kiddush ha-chaydish, or when to establish a new chaydish, v'ibar hashana, or regarding the year, should be a ibar year or not. Avu b'noy, Rav Talmideh, father and son, a teacher and student, their opinion is counted all as one. Over here, you need the number of this. You can't paskin just with one person. Here, you actually need a full bezdin, whether 23 or whatever number of the bezdin you need. So over here, when you take the count, there has to be separate people. It can't be two people, a father and student, a father and the son, or a teacher and student, that it's really just one opinion. So this is clearly not like what Rav said, that a teacher and student could be counted as two opinions. And says the Gemara, it depends what kind of student this is. Kika Rav, when Rav said you can count a student as a separate opinion, Kagain Rav Kahana Ravasi, like the students of Rav Kahana and Ravasi, the Gemara de Rav Havatzrichi, they did need Rav to teach them the halachas. But once they learned from Rav the facts, the halachas, Rav gave him over the Messiah of all the halachas, but then they understood on their own, they had their own ideas, and they understood how then you could compare one matter to another. It wasn't just that they were receiving from Rav and they had no opinion, no understanding of their own. So therefore Rashi explains, every Talmud Chacham in the world ultimately is receiving from his teacher, and back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. If you would say that a student and a teacher is always considered to be one opinion, so you can't count anybody. Everybody is always receiving from the generation before. But then, do you have an understanding on your own? Do you have an opinion on your own? To be Madame Milsa La Milsa. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi had an opinion over their own, therefore they're counted as a separate opinion. But in the Braisa, it's speaking about a student that's just receiving from his teacher, and he doesn't have any idea, any understanding of his own. So the Gemara Amar Rabavo said, Asara dvarim yesh ben dinim mominus ladinim nefashis. So this is going back to the Mishnah. So the first Mishnah here in the Perek, where it had a whole list of things where when you're judging money matters, it's different between capital punishment, and there's a list of 10 things that the Mishnah says that they differ. V'kulon ein noigin b'sheira niskal, and now all these differences do not apply when it comes to judging an ox that Gordon killed someone and it has to be put to death, has to be stoned to death. So none of these distinctions between money and capital punishment, we're not going to put Sheira Niskal in the category of capital punishment, chutz me'esrin v'shloisha, besides the requirement to have 23 judges. This is something we learned already in the first Perek. The Mishnah there learned out that the gam ba'ol of yumas, that when you give the punishment to a human being, so you have to have a bezna 23. Similar, when you're stoning an ox to death, it's compared to the death of the owner himself, that you have to have a bezin of 23. But besides that, but benegay to stoning a ox to death, all the other things that it says benegay to when you're killing a person, it doesn't apply by an ox. Menanamili, what's the source for this? Because the pasuk says, "Lo yisate mishpat of yoincha berivai." You should not allow the judgment of a poor person. So if you have sata means when you want to lean in one direction because you have a majority, but you can't follow the majority when you're judging a person. What does this mean? This is the halacha by din nefashis. When you only have one in the majority more than the minority, that's not enough to paskin based on one. You always have to have two. Now the Gemara already brought that this is learned out from a different pasuk, which is and then it says during the pasuk that you shouldn't go after Raiv. There's really another pasuk that you learned that out from, that you don't go after Raiv, one that is for din and nefashis. So here this is extra pasuk. So what do we learn out from this pasuk? Mishpat avyancha iatamata. When it comes to judgment of a person, so then you say that you can't rely on one in the majority to give him capital punishment. Why? Because over here the Torah says, the Torah wants you to do whatever possible to save him. So regarding him, the Torah says, only if you have two in the majority could you give him misa. But when it comes to the shoyer haniskal, a shoyer that went and gored and killed someone, this is a wild ox. So over here, we're not looking to find his innocence. What's the point? Why would we want to look to save this ox that's wild and could then chas v'shalom kill someone else? Adarabah, here Rashi says, the pasuk says, "Ubiyarta ramikirbecha." If you own a wild ox like this, so you have to get rid of it. So over here, in this case, you the halachas that apply by misa by another person, all the other halachas that the Mishnah said, that this distinction between din and mamanis and din and nefashis, they all basically are based on one akudah. That by din and nefashis, we have to do whatever is possible to save this person from being killed. So therefore, all the other halachas, besides the number of the bezin, 23, does not apply by a shoyer niskal. Adarabah, v'yarta rom v'kibecha, that by him you have to do whatever possible to kill the shoyer niskal. Okay, so now the Gemara asks in a detail of the statement that the Gemara here said. Who was it? Rabbi Vo said asar dvarim, that there were 10 things that the Mishnah listed. That's the distinction between din and mamanis and din and nefashis. So the Gemara asks on this: are there 10 things? In fact, the Gemara asara, there are 10 things. Hotesav, there's only 9 things. That's a distinction between din and nefashis and din and mamanis. So the Gemara immediately clarifies, what's this question? Ho asara katani. Take a look at the Mishnah. All the things that it says between din and nefashis and din and mamanis, there are actually 10 halachas that distinguish them. So what's this question here? So the Gemara explains, the question is mishom the ein hakel kisherin, because there are 2 points that the Mishnah said that are really 1 point. When it says in the Mishnah that not everybody is kosher to be a judge for din and nefashis, and the Gemara will soon explain exactly who that excludes. And then the other halacha that it said in the Mishnah, the esrim v'shloisha, that you have to have a esrim v'shloisha, which is a Sanhedrin, not the Sanhedrin Gedayla, but a Sanhedrin Ketana. You have to have a Sanhedrin. Chodehi, it's really one and the same point, because if it has to be a Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin has to be 23, and a Sanhedrin cannot be people that are not fit to be on a Sanhedrin, as we'll see soon in the Gemara, a Mamzer, a Ger, that can't be in a Sanhedrin. So it's really 1 point, because it's a Sanhedrin, so therefore it has to be 23, and not anyone that's not kosher to be in a Sanhedrin. So that's counted as 1. So therefore, the Gemara is asking Rabbi Vo, why did he say that there's 10 points? There's really only 9. So the Gemara answers, no, there is a 10th point, which Rabbi Vo is including, and that's what it says in a Braisa. The Tanya in a Braisa, it says, Ein mashivim b'Sanhedrin zakyon esris, that you can't have in a Sanhedrin somebody that is old or someone that can't have children. And the reason is because these are people that can't have proper compassion, b'negei to din and nefashis. We're talking a dafke b'negei to, they can be in a Sanhedrin, but not in a Sanhedrin for din and nefashis, because since by din and nefashis you have to be able to have mercy on this person to try to save him, to see his innocence. So a zaken and a sres, or also a mishayin lebanim, someone that does not have yet children. So in such a case, he can't have proper compassion, and so therefore he can't judge din and nefashis. And Rabbi Yehuda adds, afach zari, a person that has a cruel nature. So he also can't be in the Sanhedrin. So this is an additional halacha that we say only by din and nefashis and not by din and mamanis. That's what Rabbi Vo said, that there's 10 points that distinguish din and mamanis from din and nefashis. Now, the Braisa goes on to say, v'chilufeim b'mesis. It's actually in the reverse when it comes to judging a person that tries to persuade people to serve Avodah Zarah. As the Gemara already brought before about this, the Rachmana Amar, regarding such an individual, the Torah says that not only we don't have to try to find his innocence, but the opposite. Do not have any mercy on him, and do not try to cover up for him. Okay, so this is the 10th point that Rabbi Vo was referring to. Going back to the Mishnah, so it said, everybody could be included in the Bezdin to judge money matters, but not by din nefashis. So Hakai lasuya mai. When it says here everybody, who's it coming to add? Amar Rav Yudah, so Rav Yudah said lasuya mamzer. It comes to say that even a mamzer, so he's not born from a kosher relationship, either from a eshes ish or from any other arayis that are esakaris. So this kind of person cannot be in the Bezdin to judge din nefashis, but he could judge din mamanis. Why does it have to say here in this Mishnah? It says it in another Mishnah. There it says, anybody that can judge matters of capital punishment, you could also judge money matters. However, there's someone that could be a judge for money matters, but you cannot be in a bezdin for capital punishment. The question was asked about this lasuye mai. What is it coming to add here? Who is it that could judge din mamanis and not din nefashis? Rav Yehuda said lasuya mamzer. That this is exactly the halacha, same halacha, that it's saying that a mamzer can discuss din nefashis, but not din mamanis, that is, but not din nefashis. So why is the Mishnah repeating the same halacha twice? So the Gemara clarifies, it must be that by one of them, Rav Yehuda said different. Chode lasuya ger. One of these Mishnayos is coming to say that even a ger could be a judge in din mamanis. The other pasuk is coming to say that a mamzer could be a judge for din mamanis. Now, and not by din nefashis. The Gemara will soon bring the source in a pasuk from where we see that not a ger and not a mamzer could be a judge by din nefashis. Now, it's necessary to have both of these mishnahs to include both a ger and a mamzer. I would not understand one from the other. The yashmin and ger. If it would only say that a ger could be a judge in din mamanis, I would say that I love it bakal. Even though the ger is not born from father and mother that are Jewish, but he himself is a full regular Jew. He can marry anybody in Klal Yisrael. So therefore, I would think that he's kosher to be. He has a proper yichus in that sense. In the sense that he could marry into Klal Yisrael, and therefore he could be a judge for din nefashis. Mamzer, when it comes to a mamzer, emalai, since the mamzer is an individual that's born from a not kosher relationship, and therefore he himself cannot marry into Klal Yisrael, so that it actually affects his own status in his relationship to other Yidden. So I would say maybe, as we'll see soon from the pasuk, by din nefashis, you have to have a proper yichus. I would say maybe it only excludes a mamzer that can't marry into Klal Yisrael. In the reverse, v'yashmina mamzer. If I would say that only the mamzer cannot be a judge for din nefashis, I would say the reason is the ba mitipa again v'yashmina mamzer. If it would say only mamzer, I would say the ba mitipa ksheira. The mamzer, even though he himself can't marry into Klal Yisrael, but the mamzer himself is born from a father and mother that were Jewish, from a tipa ksheira. So I would say that the mamzer is someone that because he's born from a tipa ksheira, so therefore he could be a judge. But the ger that does not come from a tipak sheda, the ger, true, he himself could marry into Klal Yisrael. So in that sense, his yichus, so to speak, is good. But on the other hand, he comes from father and mother that are not Yidden. So I would say that the ger cannot be a judge. So therefore, I have to say that he's able to be a judge as well. Okay, so and again, it seems like here the Gemara's pshat over here has been negate to the being included in being allowed to be a judge by dinei mamanis, right? It's not tzrichas benegate to dinei fashis, but it's a tzrichas benegate to dinei mamanis that both the ger and the mamzer are able to be judges for dinei mamanis. Okay, now the Gemara here brings the source. From where do we see that both the ger and the mamzer cannot be a judge by dinei nefashis? So not everybody can be a judge for din nefashis. So as we said, it excludes someone that doesn't have a proper yichus, not the ger, not the mamzer. My timer, what's the reason for this? The Tana Rav Yosef taught kishem shebezdin minukin bitsedek. Just like a bezdin has to be totally clean, they have to be completely just. It says v'tzedek tzedek tishbait, they have to be completely justice. That includes also kach menukim mikol mum. They also have to be clean of any blemish, and what this refers to is not a physical blemish, but a blemish in their lineage. And therefore, a ger mamzer cannot be a judge for din nefashis. Amar Ameima, so Ameima said about this, Maikra, what's the source in the pasuk for this? Because it says, Kulech yofer rayasi umum ein bach. In Shir Hashirim, it describes Yidden, and it says that you're beautiful, you're my spouse, and I see no blemish in you. So the Gemara darshans this, that rayasi here, it refers not to all Yidden, but it refers to a bezdin, that the bezdin has to be without any blemish. And here the Gemara says, what's the blemish? There has to be proper yichus. So the Gemara questions this. How do you know? V'dilma mum mamish. Maybe all it's saying is that in order to be a judge for din and nefashis, you don't have to have good yichus. You just have to have no physical blemish in your body. Maybe that's what it means. Amar Ravacha bar Yaakov. So Ravacha bar Yaakov says, Amakra. There's another pasuk that says when Moshe Rabbeinu. This is in Ba'aleischa, when there were other Zikanim that came together with Moshe Rabbeinu. It says V'syatzvu sham imach, and they'll stand there with you outside by the oil mayed. They'll stand there outside with you. And it says imach. Imach means b'day malach. They have to be similar to you. Similar to you does not mean in the blemish. Similar to you means they have to be on your level in lineage and yichus and greatness. And therefore, we know that this is what it means also regarding all judges as well. Just like the 70 then, in Sanhedrin, you have to be similar to Moshe Rabbeinu in the yichus. But how could you learn from that case? Over there, because they were receiving from the Shechina, like Moshe Rabbeinu, then they're going to be similar to Moshe Rabbeinu spiritually. In the Shechina, there maybe we're saying that they have to be imach, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. How can I learn from there regarding every bezin that's coming to judge? So Elam Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So therefore, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Oh Makra." We learn out from the pasuk that it says in Parshas Yisrael when Moshe Rabbeinu appointed the judges. V'nasu itach, they'll carry the load of Klal Yisrael itach together with you. Why does it add the pasuk itach? So Rashi clarifies this is not the pasuk over there in Parshas Ba'aleischa where it says a similar pasuk, but this is a pasuk in Parshas Yisrael. It's not talking about the revelation of the Shechina. Here it's talking about judging the Yidden, and here itach means b'daimin lach lahevu. They should be similar to Moshe Rabbeinu beruchnius and his level and his lineage, and therefore from his we learn that a judge in din and nefashos has to be similar to Moshe Rabbeinu in their yichus.